Support for this podcast comes from the Central Valley Journalism Collaborative, connecting communities with the resources, infrastructure, and networks to ensure a vibrant local free press.
From KVPR in Fresno, this is Central Valley Daily. It's Monday, August 3rd. I'm Soreath Hok. A new report is pulling back the curtain on California's public defense system, and it shows some glaring problems.
California is an outlier. It's one of only 2 states that provides no statewide standards for how counties are supposed to run their public defense systems.
We speak with a researcher who finds that some counties in the Central Valley have some of the highest caseloads and questions over conflicts of interest. That conversation in just a moment.
KVPR is now 100% community funded. A great way to show your support for public radio and this station is to purchase a $100 ticket for KVPR's $10,000 drawing. Purchase tickets now at kvpr.org/10K.
And now to our feature story. When someone lands in the criminal justice system, they have a right to legal representation. Those who can't afford it are appointed a public defender. But a new report reveals not all services are created equal. A report from the nonprofit Wren Collective scrutinizes California counties that operate with a privatized public defense system. That means private attorneys are paid a flat fee to take on an unlimited number of public defense cases. The Wren Collective says that can result in dire outcomes like lack of accountability and financial conflicts of interest. Researchers found some attorneys were saddled with up to 400 to 500 cases at a time. Some of the worst caseloads on record were here in the Central Valley. I spoke to Josh Schwartz about this. He's a researcher at the Wren Collective and a former public defender himself. He starts by telling me about what the average workload for a public defender looks like.
Individually, a typical case, you could have everything from a case that lasted a day, where it was over and done within a few hours, or a case that took weeks of actual work dedicated to that specific case. So it varies really case to case. But I've worked in jurisdictions where there were really high caseloads, about 200 felonies at a time. And I've also worked in better resource jurisdictions where the caseloads were much lower. And so I've experienced sort of both ends of that. But in the case where I had hundreds of felonies at once, I don't think I could have imagined having 300, 400, or 600 cases at a time.
Right, and that is the actual numbers that we're looking at in this report that you produced from the Wren Collective. You said, quote, "There are not enough hours in the day and in the year, even if these lawyers never went to sleep and worked every hour of the day to provide effective representation."
Right.
And we're talking, you said 200 was a lot. We're talking 400, 500.
Right. What we've seen is that the problem of astronomical caseloads in these jurisdictions that rely on a specific method of privatizing their public defense system through what are called flat fee contracts, that lawyers have 400, 500, 600 cases a year. In one county, it was 500 new cases a year, and that no one could provide, no matter how skilled or dedicated a lawyer is, no one can provide adequate representation under those circumstances.
And when you're talking about this flat fee contract, can you tell us exactly how that works when it's privatized?
Sure. So a flat fee is a lump sum to a for-profit law firm or individual private attorney for a limitless number of cases. And when we see those agreements, there is an inherent conflict of interest placed between the lawyer and their client, because the more time spent on each individual case, the more time and attention each client gets, the less profitable that fee is. And keep in mind, in many situations, the lawyers are free to, and in fact do have paying clients in either criminal cases or civil cases in other counties. And so there's this financial conflict of interest at the heart of flat fee contracts that is a key reason why many states around the country have actually banned them. And for decades, everyone from the American Bar Association to even California's own state bar have called for this practice to be banned.
I'm wondering then, why has California continued to stick with it? Why have we not moved on to a different system? I'm sure there's examples of other things working, right?
Right. Well, California is an outlier. It's one of only 2 states that provides no statewide standards for how counties are supposed to run their public defense systems and no statewide consistent funding for trial level public defense. So as a result, counties are left to their own. And under those circumstances, we've seen these flat fees flourish in California when states like Michigan, South Dakota, Nevada, Washington have all banned them.
And in your latest report, you're focusing on 9 counties in California that are still continuing this practice. Many of them are in our area, in the central San Joaquin Valley. Can you highlight some of the counties that you really focused on, in particular Madera County and Kings County? What was the situation like there?
Sure. Well, the caseload numbers that we saw out of Kings County were the worst that we've seen on record for California. You had one lawyer who in 2025 handled over 400 felonies and over 180 misdemeanors on top of that. Another lawyer who handled over 360 felonies, over 150 misdemeanors, and had 20 post-conviction cases on top of that, which can be incredibly time-consuming. You saw another lawyer with 320 cases, most of them felonies, in just a matter of 7 months. And so those caseloads are, I think, far worse than we were expecting when we looked into this, and they're worse than anything on record in California to date. Madera is a similar system where we saw an average of about 500 new cases a year per lawyer at the private firm that has a contract to run that system. And that's not counting cases that were carried over from the previous year into the year. We're talking about 500 brand new cases a year. And so those numbers risk undercounting severely what the caseloads are like there.
Wow. And how long of a time frame are we talking about? Is this happening over decades? Is this a recent discovery?
Flat fees have been criticized for decades. If you opened a newspaper in the San Diego area in the 1980s, you were likely to see an article about the very controversial privatized system in San Diego at the time. Now they have a well-respected public defender's office. But at the time, it was incredibly controversial because people knew that it was driving caseloads higher. And we have since seen empirical studies from around the country, including California, that these systems lead to higher rates of pretrial incarceration, higher rates of conviction, longer sentences. And in California, 7 of the top 8 counties for combined per capita jail and prison incarceration rates use flat fees exclusively. So this has been a problem for a long time. As I said, it's been criticized for decades. There have been, not including our report, 6 separate recent exposés of various counties from, there was a Cal Matters report from Madera, there were reports from the Sixth Amendment Center and the Office of the State Public Defender on individual flat fee counties recently that all found findings that were similar to ours, just not quite as egregious. So I think everyone is on notice of what this system looks like in California, where the right to counsel exists in these jurisdictions, really in theory, but not at all in practice.
And when you're talking about a financial conflict of interest, at least one firm that was part of all these investigations, including Cal Matters, looked at a private firm that was dubbed as the Walmart of public defense. Can you talk about that case? I think it was tied actually to Madera, right?
Right. That's the firm that operates in Madera. They also have a significant portion of the public defense cases in Fresno, Merced, and they're also in Amador and Calaveras as the main providers. And they've been around for decades. And what we saw when we looked at their caseloads were, lawyers carrying 300, 400, 500 new cases a year. And consistently, on the other hand, the firm reporting to county officials that resources for their system are adequate. And that's another inherent problem with this flat fee structure is, you have someone bid for a contract to provide services, and the firm has been known historically to advertise that their services are less expensive. And then there's less of an incentive to then go back to the county when caseloads are out of control and say, we're really drowning here. We need help.
And right now, we're seeing major needs for public defense, right? In fact, a lot of it tied to the mass deportations that have been happening. How is that affecting services?
It's a huge concern for us. Criminal courts have long been a dragnet for ICE detention and deportation. Even low-level arrests can lead to deportation proceedings for someone who has lawful status in this country. And so when lawyers are overwhelmed with 400, 500 cases at a time, and we know from all the empirical research that that's going to lead to higher rates of conviction, right? We're deeply concerned about the effect on the immigrant community in California, especially in this environment of brazenly aggressive ICE enforcement. When you look nationally, the number of people deported who had marijuana convictions has increased 77%. For only traffic convictions, it's 43%. And at the same time, we've seen a massive increase over just several months last year, about 78% in the deportation of Californians. So we're really concerned about what this caseload crisis means for California's immigrant population when public defenders are often essentially on the front lines of preventing these deportation cases from happening.
Yeah, and we've already seen so many of these cases tied up in court, lots of delays and trials and representation. Moving forward, what can be done to sort of offset this? Because your report really focuses on the fact that this is actually a paradox, right? It's like we're spending a lot of money to pay for public defense that doesn't work, and that leads to higher rates of incarceration.
Right. And I think that everyone needs to realize that these contracts do not actually save money in the end. That's often how they're billed to counties as a way to cut down on budget costs. But the average county spends 6 times the amount that it spends on public defense on detention and corrections. And when we looked at counties for our report that are using these flat fee systems exclusively, they spend about 17% more per capita on detention and corrections than counties that use a traditional public defender's office. And I'll give you Santa Cruz as an example of a county that switched a few years ago from a completely flat fee model to primarily a traditional public defender's office. They've seen, and what they've been able to document, about $2.1 million in savings on incarceration costs alone based on switching models. So in the end, these systems drive costly incarceration rates higher. 7 of the top 8 counties for combined per capita jail and prison incarceration rates use these systems exclusively. And 70% of those counties are actually seeing their incarceration numbers trend up in either their jail or prison incarceration rates. That's deeply troubling because when you look to the state as a whole, there's been about a 28-29% reduction over the last decade in per capita jail and prison incarceration rates. At the same time, 70% of these counties have seen an increase in the last decade in either one of those metrics. So it's incredibly costly both for the counties, but there's also a massive human cost as well.
And we're talking about 2 different systems. You're saying, the public defender's office system has helped to reduce, the problems that we're seeing with the flat fee contract system. Is there any movement to reform that system since so many counties are still using it?
There's a bill that passed the Assembly last year, AB 690, the Fair Representation Act, to ban flat fee contracts. It's still pending in the Senate, but we think that counties shouldn't wait for a change in the law to act now because these systems have been shown for decades to be deeply problematic, to drive costly incarceration. And California needs to bring its public defense system up to code, especially during a time of such brazenly aggressive ICE enforcement at the federal level.
Josh Schwartz, researcher with the Wren Collective. This was really insightful. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
And that's today's show. Today's episode was produced by Jonathan Linden and KVPR. I'm Soreath Hok. Find the latest local news anytime at kvpr.org.
The fatal shooting of a teenager at a protest in Seattle has gone unsolved for 6 years.
This is open in your face. How are there no answers?
Our investigation has uncovered new evidence and witnesses who say they've never talked to police.
Did police ever call you?
Not once.
Listen to We Keep Us Safe, a new true crime series on the Embedded podcast from NPR.